Let us begin with a question that is also an invitation. What if the ancient stories of floods and towers, of wandering patriarchs and burning cities, were never meant to be only history? What if they were always, at their deepest level, a map of the interior life, a diagram of the forces that move within you, right now, as you listen to these words? This is the vision of Jacob Boehme, a shoemaker who lived in 17th century Germany, and who saw, in one luminous moment, the inner workings of the cosmos, reflected in a beam of sunlight on a pewter dish. What he saw changed him, and what he wrote, in dense and fiery prose, has been changing people ever since. Today, we're going to walk through his reading of Genesis, specifically the era of Noah and Abraham, not as distant history, but as a living description of what happens in the human soul when it awakens, struggles, and finally finds its way home. This is not a summary. It is a transmission. By the end, you will not merely know what Boehme said. You will feel the territory he charted, and perhaps, if you listen with the right attention, you will recognize something of yourself in these ancient figures, these symbolic dramas, these eternal conflicts that are playing out, even now, in the quiet theater of your own heart. The fracture of consciousness. Boehme begins with a loss. Once, he says, humanity spoke what he calls the language of nature. This was not a language like English or German, or any tongue we know today. It was a way of speaking in which every word matched the essence of the thing it named. When the first humans named an animal, the sound of the name carried the actual quality of that creature. To speak was to know. Language was not a set of arbitrary labels slapped onto a world we did not understand. It was a seamless garment, woven from meaning itself. But this language was lost. You know the story, the Tower of Babel. Humanity, in its pride, decided to storm heaven by building a tower of bricks and ambition. God scattered them, confused their tongues, and the one language became many. What was unified became fragmented. What was intuitive became confused. Now, Boehme does not read this story as something that happened only in ancient Mesopotamia. He reads it as something that happens in every human soul. The Tower of Babel is not just a monument of stone, it is the intellect's attempt to reach the divine through its own rigid structures, its opinions, its arguments, its certainties. Watch this in yourself. When you are lost in thought, building elaborate mental structures, defending position, arguing your way toward truth, you are building a tower. And the result, always, is confusion. The one voice of inner knowing becomes many competing voices. The mind, trying to climb its way to God, ends up scattered across a plain of endless opinions. Boehme sees this as the birth of what he calls the Antichrist. But do not think of some political figure and some villain from a prophecy. The Antichrist, for Boehme, is something much closer to home. It is the false self. It is the beast of ego dressed up in religious clothing, performing the rituals, speaking the words, wearing the outward forms of spirituality, but lacking the inner life of God. This is a difficult teaching, but an important one. You can be religious and still be building a tower. You can be spiritual and still be trapped in the confusion of Babel. The question is not what words you speak or what rituals you perform. The question is whether your will is aligned with the flow of spirit, or whether your will is busy constructing monuments to itself. The two lineages within you. Now the teaching deepens. Boehme speaks of two lineages, two spiritual bloodlines that run through the stories of Genesis. One is the line of nature, symbolized by figures like Ishmael and Ham. The other is the line of grace, and symbolized by Isaac and Shem. These are not merely historical figures. They are forces within you. Think of Ishmael. He's the son of Abraham by Hagar, the servant woman, He is the wild man, born of natural desires, raised in the wilderness. The Bible says his hand will be against every man, and every man's hand against him. He is vigorous, untamed, driven by instinct and ambition. And then there is Isaac, the child of promise, born to Sarah when she was old, born not through natural striving, but through divine gift. He is gentler, quieter, the child of faith. Now here is the crucial teaching, and listen carefully because it is easy to misunderstand. Ishmael is not evil. He is not something to be destroyed. Your wild self, your natural drive, your ambition and animal vitality, these are not sins. They are God's creation. They are necessary for life in this world. You cannot live without them. But Ishmael cannot inherit the promise. The wild man is not meant to rule the house. Nature is not meant to sit on the throne of the soul. The teaching is one of proper relationship. Ishmael must serve Isaac. The ego must serve the spirit. Your natural drives are powerful servants, but terrible masters. When the wild man rules, you are scattered, conflicted, constantly grasping. When the wild man serves, his energy fuels your spiritual work. His fire warms your house instead of burning it down. This is not about suppression. It is about integration. The spiritual path does not ask you to kill your Ishmael. It asks you to let him mature, to find his proper place, to channel his ferocity into service. You can see this struggle in your own life. When your ambition runs wild, consuming everything in its path, you feel the chaos. When your appetites rule, demanding satisfaction at any cost, you experience the scattering. But when these same energies bow to something higher, when they become fuel for a deeper purpose, everything changes. The wild man becomes an ally. The chaos becomes creative power. Ritual as inner surgery. Boehme now turns to the ancient rituals, circumcision and baptism, and reads them in a startling way. These are not, for him, merely external ceremonies. They are images of a spiritual surgery that must take place within you. He speaks of what he calls the serpent's ends, a parasitical desire that has attached itself to the human soul since the fall. This is the grasping, consuming quality that turns every good thing into a possession, every relationship into a transaction, every moment of beauty into something to be owned. The serpent's ends is not simply bad desire. It is the distortion of desire itself. It is want that has become greed, attraction that has become grasping, love that has become possession. Circumcision, in Boehme's reading, is the cutting away of this parasitical energy. It is the removal of the foreskin of the heart, the spiritual operation that separates true desire from false, that prunes the wild growth, so that the good fruit can flourish. Baptism is similar. It is a drowning of the old nature, a descent into the waters of transformation from which a new self can rise. But here is what matters. These are not things that happened once, to someone else, long ago. They are invitations to a living process that is available to you now. Every time you choose to let go of a grasping desire, you are practicing circumcision of the heart. Every time you surrender the old self into the waters of stillness, letting your rigid identities dissolve, you are experiencing baptism. The rituals point to something real, something you can do, something that transforms. The overlapping worlds. Here is one of Boehme's most radical insights, and it requires a shift in how you imagine the cosmos. We tend to think of heaven as somewhere else, up there, far away, a place we go after death if we have been good. But Boehme says something different. Heaven and earth are not separate places, they are overlapping dimensions of the same reality. The spiritual world permeates the physical world, the way water permeates a sponge. They occupy the same space, but they do not mix. They are distinct but not distant. This means that you are standing right now in heaven and in the world of nature simultaneously. What determines which one you experience is not your location in space, it is your internal state. When your will is aligned with the divine will, when your heart is open, when you are living from the Isaac nature within you, you are in heaven, not going to heaven someday. In heaven now. The kingdom is at hand. When your will is turned in on itself, grasping, defending, building towers, you are in what Boehme calls the dark world, not a place you will go after death, a place you are living from right now. This changes everything. The spiritual life is not about earning passage to another realm. It is about awakening to the realm that is already here, already now, already surrounding and permeating everything you see. The veil between the worlds is not thick. It is your attention. It is your will. It is the orientation of your heart. The transmutation of sorrow. There is a difficult teaching here that requires attention. Boehme observes that the same emotional energy that leads to despair can be transmuted into renewal. Sorrow, he says, is a deep, vibration-altering shaking of the soul. It is not a small emotion, it reaches into the foundations of who you are. When this shaking is directed downward, come into self-pity, into bitterness, into the endless rehearsal of wounds, it destroys, it dissolves the cohesion of the self. It leads to what Boehme calls destruction. But when the exact same energy is directed upward, into surrender, into what he calls repentance, it becomes the birth pangs of transformation. The shaking becomes fertile, the dissolution becomes a clearing for something new to grow. This is alchemy in the truest sense. The lead of despair becomes the gold of renewal, not by removing the sorrow, but by redirecting it, not by escaping the shaking, but by letting it shake loose what needs to fall away. You have felt this in your own life. You know the difference between a sorrow that pulls you down into a pit and a sorrow that, somehow, breaks something open and leaves you more spacious, more tender, more alive. The teaching is that you have a choice, not about whether you will be shaken, because life will shake you, but about which way the energy flows, up or down, destruction or regeneration. The path of surrender, what Boehme calls resignation or Gelassenheit, is the practice of letting the shaking work on you, of not resisting the dissolution, of trusting that what falls away needs to fall, and that what remains is more essentially you. The humility of God. Now we come to one of the strangest and most beautiful moments in the Genesis narrative. Abraham's encounter with the three strangers at the oaks of Mamre. The story tells us that Abraham looked up and saw three men standing nearby. He ran to meet them, bowed to the ground, offered them water, bread, and rest. It was only as the encounter unfolded that he realized these were not ordinary travelers. This was a divine visitation. God had come to Abraham in the form of three ordinary men. Boehme reads this as a revelation of the nature of God. The divine Trinity does not appear in thunder and lightning, does not announce itself with cosmic fanfare. It appears in humility, in simplicity, in a form that can easily be mistaken for the ordinary. This is important. The proud miss God because they are looking for something impressive. They want visions and signs and wonders. They want the tower experience, the dramatic ascent. But God comes as three travelers, dusty from the road, grateful for bread and water. God comes in the humble, the overlooked, the easily dismissed. This is also a teaching about how to recognize the divine in your own life, not in the peak experiences you hope for, but in the simple encounters you might ignore, not in the dramatic breakthroughs, but in the quiet moments of presence, the ordinary kindnesses, the unremarkable gestures of love. Abraham's hospitality is rewarded with promise. He welcomes the strangers, and in doing so, he welcomes the divine. This is the way it works. Humility meets humility. Openness recognizes the hidden. the spirit of intercession. What follows is Abraham's famous bargaining with God over the fate of Sodom. You know the story. God tells Abraham that the outcry against Sodom is great and their sin is very grave. Abraham responds with a question. Will you destroy the righteous with the wicked? What if there are 50 righteous people in the city? 45, 40, 30, 20, 10. Boehme reads this exchange as something more than a negotiation about numbers. He sees it as the spirit of love trying to mitigate the spirit of wrath within the cosmos itself. This is a profound teaching about the nature of intercession. When you pray for others, when you hold the suffering of the world in your heart and ask for mercy, you're not petitioning an indifferent God to change his mind. You're participating in an eternal drama. Aligning yourself with the force of compassion that is always working within the structure of reality. The wrath of God in Boehme's vision is not petty anger, it is the fire of reality itself, the consuming intensity that burns away everything false. This fire is not bad, it is necessary, but it is fierce. Love does not eliminate this fire, love works within it, through it, transforming its effects. The intercessor stands between the fire and the world, not to extinguish the flames, but to allow love to shape how they burn. This is what Abraham does. He places himself in the gap, holds the tension, and in doing so, becomes a channel for mercy. The fire of purification. Sodom burns, fire and brimstone fall from heaven. The cities of the plain are destroyed. Lot escapes with his daughter, but his wife looks back and becomes a pillar of salt. For Boehme, this is not merely a story of punishment, it is an allegory for what inevitably happens to the false self. The fire that falls on Sodom is God's anger only in the sense that intense reality consumes everything that is unlike love. The divine is fire. When something made of falseness encounters that fire, it cannot survive. This is not cruelty. It is simply the nature of things. The cities of the plain represent consciousness that has turned entirely inward, that has made pleasure and consumption its only gods, that has lost all connection to the higher nature. When such a consciousness encounters the fire of the real, there is nothing left to preserve. But Lot escapes. There is something in him, however small, that responds to the call. There is a part of you that can walk out of the burning city if you will hear the voice that says, "Flee, do not look back." Lot's wife is a teaching about attachment. She looked back. She could not fully release what she was leaving, and so she became salt, a preservative, something that keeps dead things from decaying but cannot bring them to life. You know this experience too, the longing for what was, the inability to fully commit to the new life, the part of you that wants transformation, but keeps turning to look at what you're losing. The teaching is clear. When the fire comes, and it will come, walk forward. Grieve what is lost, but do not freeze in the gaze of nostalgia. The road leads somewhere. The fire, though terrifying, is a gift. Recovering the language of nature. Now let us return to where we began with the lost language, the tongue that Adam spoke before the fall, before Babel, before the scattering. Boehme has a curious teaching about vowels and consonants. He says that the 5 vowels, A, E, I, O, U, are the holy name of God. They represent the free, uninhibited flow of spirit. When you speak a vowel, your breath moves without obstruction. The sound is open, resonant, alive. Consonants, by contrast, represent the hardness of the material world. They are the structure, the boundary, the resistance that gives shape to the flow. Just as you need consonants to shape vowels into words, The spirit needs the density of matter to manifest itself. The letter H, Boehme says, represents the breath, the aspiration that moves spirit into the world. What does this mean for practice? It means that you can begin to recover the language of nature, not by learning some mystical vocabulary, but by changing how you attend to reality. Most of the time, you relate to the world through labels. You see a tree and think tree, and the word stands between you and the actual living presence. The label is a consonant without a vowel, a structure without the breath. But you can learn to listen differently. You can begin to feel the essence of things, the resonance, the quality that exists before and beneath the name. This is what Boehme calls the sensual language, and it is still available to you. When you sit with something, a flower, a face, a feeling, and let go of the need to name it, to categorize it, to file it away, you are practicing the language of nature. When you let the thing speak its own vowel, its own open sound, you are hearing with the ears of Adam, the practice of resignation. Boehme returns again and again to a single German word, Gelassenheit. It is often translated as resignation, but this English word carries too much of a sense of defeat, of giving up. What Boehme means is something more like release. It is the stopping of the wheel of your own willing. It is the voluntary laying down of the ego's insistence that things be a certain way. This is the heart of the practice. You cannot force your way to enlightenment. The Tower of Babel method, striving, arguing, building systems, always leads to confusion. No matter how high you climb, you will never storm heaven through effort. But there is something you can do. You can stop. You can stop the endless generating of opinions. You can stop the constant grasping for the next experience. You can stop the wheel. And in that stopping, something else can move. The divine will, which is always present but drowned out by the noise of your willing, can begin to operate through you. This is not passive. It requires tremendous effort, the effort of not effort, the discipline of releasing discipline. It is like learning to float. You have to stop thrashing. You have to trust that the water will hold you. Every contemplative tradition has some version of this teaching. Let go, surrender, trust, stop trying so hard. Boehme's contribution is to show how this maps onto the biblical story. Abraham did not storm heaven. He received a promise. Isaac was not earned. He was given. The line of grace cannot be manufactured. It must be allowed. Living with the tensions. Before we close, let us acknowledge some of the tensions in this teaching, because a genuine path is never simple. Boehme presents a God who is both the serene liberty as the light world of peace and love, and the terrifying nature, the fire and wrath that consumes. How can both be true? How can God be both rest and intensity, both peace and flame? Boehme's answer is that these are not contradictions but polarities. Light needs fire to be revealed. Without the fierceness of nature, without the ego's resistance, without the darkness, the love of God would have no platform on which to exist. It would be an eternal potential, never manifesting. This means that your darkness is not simply a mistake to be corrected. It is the necessary friction against which the light becomes visible. Your passions, your anger, your drive, these are the fuel that, when ignited by awareness, becomes the light of love. This is a dangerous teaching, easily misused. It does not mean that you should cultivate darkness or indulge your worst impulses. It means that you should not despair at finding darkness in yourself. The fire needs fuel. The gold emerges from the ore through heat. Similarly, Ishmael is rejected from the inheritance and yet blessed to become a great nation. What does this mean? It means that your ego, your intellect, your natural mind, whom cannot inherit the spiritual kingdom. You cannot think your way to God. But this does not mean the intellect is valueless. It has its own kingdom, science, logic, survival, practical wisdom. These are legitimate domains. The intellect is only a problem when it tries to usurp the throne of the spirit. Honor your Ishmael in his proper place. Let your wild man serve in the wilderness where he belongs. Just do not let him sit on Isaac's throne. Questions for your own journey. Now let us turn inward. In your daily life, are you building a Tower of Babel? Are you trying to reach the divine through rigid concept, through arguments, through systems and definitions? Or are you learning the language of nature by listening to the essence of the moment, by feeling the vowel beneath the word? How is the relationship between Isaac and Ishmael within your own psyche? Is your wild man serving the work, or is he running the show? Is your natural drive a powerful servant fueling your spiritual journey? Or has it become a master, dragging you from desire to desire? When you experience the fire, the conflict, the friction of life, do you see it as punishment, or can you recognize it as the refining heat that separates gold from dross? Can you cooperate with the burning, even when it hurts? And finally, can you practice seeing the physical world not as a barrier to God, but as the consonants that give shape to the vowels of the divine breath? Can you find heaven here, now, overlapping with the world you see, waiting only for the shift in your attention that lets you recognize what has always been present? An invitation. We have covered much ground together. We have walked from the Tower of Babel to the burning cities, from the wild man in the wilderness to the child of promise, from the language of nature to the practice of resignation. But all of this remains only words until you make it your own. The map is not the territory. Boehme's teaching, profound as it is, remains a description until you enter the experience yourself. The alchemy he describes, and the transmutation of sorrow into renewal, the integration of Ishmael and Isaac, the recovery of the language of nature. These are not beliefs to hold, but experiments to perform. So here is the invitation. Tonight or tomorrow, or whenever you find a quiet moment, sit with one of these teachings, not to think about it, but to be with it. Choose the one that most calls to you, the one that creates the most resonance or the most resistance. Perhaps it is the tower. Perhaps you recognize yourself in the endless building, the striving, the confusion. If so, practice stopping. Just for a few minutes. Let the wheel of your willing slow down. See what happens when you're not generating, not grasping, not climbing. Perhaps it is Ishmael and Isaac. Perhaps you feel the war between your wild nature and your deeper knowing. If so, try speaking to your Ishmael, not to banish him, but to negotiate. Ask him what he needs, ask him what he's afraid of. Offer him a role in the work, rather than the throne. Perhaps it is the fire. Perhaps you are in a burning time, and everything is being consumed. If so, try walking forward. Grieve. Yes, but do not look back. Trust that what survives the fire is what was real, and that what burns away was only chaff. Whatever you choose, do not only listen. Do not only understand. Enter the teaching with your whole self. Because the stories of Genesis are not about people who lived long ago, they are about forces that live in you, right now, in this moment. The tower is in you, the wild man is in you, the child of promise is in you, the fire is coming, and the language of nature, the seamless garment of meaning, the vowel beneath the word, is waiting, as it has always been waiting, for you to listen. May you find your way home.